All right, this Days of Decision. World in Flames, for which this is designed to be a potential supplement at least, is the most military of all the big World War II geoglobal strategic type games. Let me check my battery again. I didn't think carefully enough. Okay. In that, the diplomatic side of things in that was less than I think in the original Third Reich. The only games that kind of are even less related to the diplomacy, well, U.S. entry was handled very in some detail but anyway, when things like Advanced Third Reich came out, and now more modern things, they filled sort of a gap in terms of adding lots of diplomatic aspects, but also research aspects. The research aspects being kind of probably stolen from, to some extent, from Hitler's war in terms of, and Axis and Allies had a limited little bit of research too. And Third Reich had a limited amount. But anyway, the big thing here was when WIF first came out, the clear thing that was missing from it was significant, ability to do diplomacy in the early war era, and there's this kind of what if, can I generate something new for the pre-war, because it really wasn't absolutely obvious that things were going to fall out in the way that they did. It was pretty likely you were going to see the Axis and the Western Allies at war. What's more questionable was, how does Russia fit into this? Does the Axis go after Russia first, as they can in some other games? And all that is answered by this. That's the sort of the raison d'etre of Days of Decision was, let's let you, start the war from a different point. It could start in Czechoslovakia, it could start here, it could start there. And as that, the original Days of Decision was, not really a game. It was it sold as a game, but I mean, it claimed to be a complete game. It had some sort of victory conditions, but it was really just something where your intention was to get you to a setup where you could play with, and you could convert it over. And you didn't handle the military units on the board. I think the Spanish Civil War had its own little board, but everything else was pretty much handled through options, and there weren't quite as many options either. I don't remember. I have these memories of it that seem different from Days of Decision 2, and then I kind of say, well, am I sure about that? Am I sure that there was, that the turn order was handled differently than the way I do it now, that there was a die roll to activate an action? I don't remember. It's been a long time. So that's kind of the point behind it, and what Days of Decision 2 does, by extending it out to 45 or 47 or whatever it can do, it manages to make a full game of it. Something that you believe could be a game. The problem that I have is, after getting about halfway through, it lost interest. And the large reason for that is the military system used in Days of Decision 2. In fact, the military and the bidding to some extent, but forget the bidding for a bit. The military system is all this hidden bid game. when you start doing hidden bids, first of all, it kills solo play to some extent. But it also deadens the game for me. I think I would dislike that hidden bidding as much in person. It's hard to tell. I kind of enjoy the wheel in Dune, which has a hidden bidding component. But here there's just too many different things when you're attacking from multiple angles, etc., as to how much do you really want to bid? What's the effect going to be? And you really can kind of just calculate it out and say, well, there is no other answer. This is the only safe choice. I could put, 1 or 4 or whatever strength points here, but then I could be overrun with 10-1, and that would be horrible. So it very quickly just becomes an exercise in competitive arithmetic in a sort of sense, because the actual band at which you can bid is very low. So you're just always trying to figure out what is the reasonable bidding band, and then, well, here's your optimal choice. Okay, but this guy could do something different. And it's just not worth puzzling that all out. It's sort of like I find the optimal and I just do it. And that means that I'd be completely predictable. So that would be no fun. I can't show you the status display because I'm leaving that out. I'm planning on probably playing with, but you can see the components in action in the playthroughs. This is not a real review anyway. This is just as my reviews are, really, but this is just thoughts after having played half a game of it, trying to learn it. So yeah, that military system deadens things, and a lot of the interesting kind of decision making that's early on, which is why I wanted to play, is to learn that interesting decision making and see how that's going to impact things. That goes away. You're in a war then. You're in a war, and there really isn't a lot more to Days of Decision other than, building DoD2, building your troops and figuring out where to send them and using them. But at the same time, you're still having diplomatic effects over here on the status display. The status display is also kind of a finicky tool. The old system used, I think, a straight line, essentially, a linear, I'm sorry, it's really early for me, so a linear representation of all the countries, and there you'd have your poles, you'd have your democracy on one side and fascism on the other, and the communists were just part of the anti-fascist camp for it. It was assumed you were going to end up in a war between the sides that historically fell into the war. This uses this sort of triple representation, with the communism as a separate and threatening situation, no longer just aligned with the Western powers. And there's something very clever about that, but when it comes down to actually mechanically resolving individual countries on there, there's this annoying amount of counting that goes on to see how you can best kind of optimize your moves on that little hex grid. So that's kind of obnoxious. Another obnoxious thing, I can't show you them, but the cards that are printed on the map. I really wish the game had come with decks of cards instead of, and I might, if I'm clever, print my own, but instead of printing cards on a piece of stock and then putting the rules for them in the back. If they'd come with a deck of cards, then the ones that were part of the map could be another deck of cards. Those are the ones that are available to everyone and you can pass them around. Is it that big a deal? Not that much solo, because I can keep flipping through the rules and most of what's on there is in here, although some of them effects on the miners and such are not. Just trying to think if there's anything else I really want to chat about here. Uh, the simplified weather, which just blankets the whole world, that is so unbelievable to me that it just kind of spoils. Why are you doing a military game here at all? That's an abstraction that I have real trouble handling. The way the initiative bidding works, if you do something big, if you're high in the list, you have a better chance of being able to repeat your action. But on the other hand, if you don't get a chance to do anything, which means you're probably towards the bottom, your effectiveness of your government can help you pull you back to the top so that you can make another action. It's very hard if you don't have effectiveness and you end up at the bottom. You have to put a big bid in to be able to have a chance to do anything. And that's a very hard thing to do because, if you're bidding 5 or 6, that's a significant amount of military effect there. Most of the optional rules I did not play with. Some of them, like hidden play, where you secretly select your options, I think they could really, really painfully affect the process. So, in particular, if the Allies are preparing to, say, stand up for Czechoslovakia, it sucks that they have to do that. That's the only thing they can do, and that's what hidden play would do for that. Is they wouldn't have the option, if Germany chooses not to go for Czechoslovakia, to go somewhere else. On the other hand, of course, Germany would see that they're aligned against them in a way that they could go to defend Czechoslovakia and change his mind and do something else. So I guess it kind of comes out in the wash where both sides are just butting heads. The national characteristics includes like military capabilities for the units where they have like a modifier in the combat. The big one is being able to leave your ideology, and that one feels like the totally wild version just totally, destabilizes everything. But even the other one is kind of disturbing. I feel like I'd rather, and I may do this, I'd rather say, you can only leave your ideology if someone else pushes you out of it. There's an ability to do that. Your own points could only be spent to return towards your ideology. If you choose to. If they want to spend a lot to pull you over, though, I'm willing to let even the U.S. Become not capitalist anymore. The reason for that is that the U.S., first of all, there's rules in the game that handle the U.S., they can be any alignment you like. Of course, this may be the best thing to do in the game, right? For the Germans, just invest all your money in bringing the U.S. on your side because the U.S. will win things. Yeah, but they'll win it, and they'll be the dominant fascist power, and that's not what you want to do. The production system, so abstracted, I'm not even sure how it's going to translate over. I've looked at the rules for playing with World in Flames, but not very well. I know it's something like 6 factors gives you a unit. Well, I don't know. But you just are able to pour everything in all at once. Your money can be saved up, and it doesn't go away or anything, which is kind of disturbing. There are a lot of little picky things in this, like the naval treaty, where, like I said, the combat and the status display have certain, annoyance factors to it. The naval treaty has the biggest. You have to keep counting, and U.S. entry, you have to keep counting how many naval factors everybody has, multiplying them out, and keep sort of a running balance in your head. So if someone buys a couple naval factors, they disrupt the naval treaty, whether the treaty's in place or not, but the treaty ordering of the naval, of the number of navies that each person has, or the relative naval power. And then everybody's got to kind of play with a calculator and be figuring out, okay, you're at 205 now. All right, that means that I only have to buy 2 more to get me up to 205 now. That won't work. It's going to have to be 3 to 210 because I can't be tied with you. I'll end up below. Yeah, it's this horrible thing. And it's really important because it's your political effectiveness that's at stake, which is why we didn't see that get shaken up too much. The comer in it is Germany. Germany can push their way out of having a penalty there without too much money because they have a 5 times multiplier, which means you start building a big navy. Not as big as usual. Anyway, I think I've kind of given enough of this overall. Yeah, this little chart which handles, any treaties or wars you declare for each specific country and what effect they have on all other countries. That effect's always going to be expressed in terms of your country, though. Is that good or bad? It works because of the nature of the status display. What kind of doesn't work is it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to move if you declare war on something, it's going to move away from you, or it's going to move towards you if you make a treaty. But it may not move away or towards you in quite the way you intend, which is to say someone can use tension between a couple of different nations, and they might include nations they're aligned with, to kind of hold a minor or squish them out in a direction you wouldn't expect from either of those actions. I think that's really clever. I really do. It really works nicely. And the point is, it becomes important who selects a given nation. So initiative becomes important even if you're not doing anything that'll get you more, political status on here. It'll get you some big game effect. Because you have the option to choose, let's trigger that country because I want to control how it moves on the status display. Anyway, I think the game, we'll see how it works as a prequel to WIF. Actually, as more than a prequel, because the big deal here is it's a wrapper to WIF. It covers the whole war. It allows you to keep making those political decisions during the war. It adds a level of overhead, though, that's much greater than what is added, say, in Advanced Third Reich in terms of the overhead of the diplomatic system in NATO, or the overhead of the research system. And that's kind of an interesting thing. WIF doesn't have a regular research system. It doesn't have something where, like, oh yeah, Japan is going to get the atomic bomb, or Germany. But it does have research baked into how the force pools are generated for the unit. So that's, in a sense, it had research on that very military basis, better than any other game out there from the very beginning, and it has continued to do that. It's enriched its position with that by adding things with the expansions. On the other hand, it's somewhat disturbing. There's an optional rule that allows you to add the atomic bomb, but it's just for the U.S. It's somewhat disturbing that a game that ends, that should end with the atomic bombs, in Japan, doesn't even have them as part of the core rules, and doesn't have any kind of option for any other country to invest in pursuing the bomb. Germany, the U.S. was very afraid that Germany was working on the bomb. The reality is they were working on other technologies, which just end up assigned directly to them through the countermix, the V weapons and such not. Again, as an optional. But the choices that were made mean that you're not going to have the kind of flexibility in the overall pursuit of the war. So, for example, submarine research, atomic weapons, the rockets, all this, that, and the other. All this is covered in most other games. Hitler's War, Third Reich even, certainly Advanced Third Reich. all of them, and the Axis empires, if you start getting later, which handles diplomacy, technology, everything, all in a card deck in a really neat way. Unconditional surrender does not handle the technology of the weaponry very much, if at all. That's kind of a weakness there. Anyway, we shall move forward. This is not something, even though it's meant to be, even though it's set up as a game, a standalone game, I just can't see doing it as such. I know Hello Gregor did play it, and listen, I don't know what his overall outcome of feelings was on it, but for me, it's just, this is really, really too dull still. It's not, it's more of a game than the original was. Oh, and then Days of Decision 2's rulebook has real problems. There are things that aren't covered very well. There are things that probably needed to be hammered out. Days of Decision 3 is probably the route you want to go. I can't tell you anything about it, except that it's derived from this, and it's probably really, really cleaned up comparatively. Like Seven Ages, probably like the first Whiff, and the first Empires in Arms, although I almost bought that. You know, I have the feeling these guys just don't really nail down a rule set as well as they can, or as well as some people could. And this was a significant enough deviation from the original Days of Decision that they managed to create all kinds of problems. And there we go.